¿Cómo están? Bienvenidas, bienvenidos a este live de FinTech México. Tenemos una sorpresa muy interesante para todas y todos ustedes. ¿Quién será esta persona misteriosa que invitamos a que venga al FinTech México Festival 2025, que será el 27 de febrero en el Museo Papalote, que arranca a las 9 de la mañana? Entonces, pues, para ya no hacerla tanto de emoción, vamos a ver quién va a ser y platicar un rato con él. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos. Estamos súper emocionados. Eyal Sivan, better known as Mr. Open Banking. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for coming to Mexico on the 27th of February. We're really excited to have you. You have many, many fans in Mexico. I think the first time I ever heard about open banking was thanks to your wonderful podcasts. And I feel really excited because usually you're the one who's interviewing people. So I'm going to interview you now. So I'm very lucky. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Sebastian, and thank you so much for the invitation. I can't wait to come back to Mexico for FinTech Mexico Festival. It's going to be very exciting.
Thank you. Well, you know, in Mexico, we have a law, the FinTech law that came into place in 2018 and establishes open finance, basically, but leaves open secondary regulation, which is what we've been struggling with for quite a while now. And I have right here with me a wonderful prize that the amazing Beatriz Duran from Open Finance Committee and the Open Finance Tribe gave to me, which is an API. And that's kind of the first question that I wanted to ask you. How difficult, how complex do you think would it be to start discussing how to build APIs in Mexico, how to create the standards for those APIs? The experience that you have, what do you think are main hurdles and basically what we can do to push that forward?
API is a funny term in IT because it's been around for so long. Oftentimes what you see in the world of IT is something will change names over the decades. It'll be the same basic idea, but it'll sort of morph, and next thing you know, the name changes. But API is unique in that it's always been called an API, even going back to the 60s. API, of course, application programming interface, just refers to how two computer systems talk to each other. It's the glue that binds them together. So the question of how hard or easy it will be is a bit of a misnomer, because you're already doing it. If you have any kind of computer systems, any kind of digital systems, they are already using APIs today. The question is, how mature are those APIs? Where are they on the journey that all APIs go through in the quest to achieve modernity? And frankly, even when you get to the latest and greatest open banking APIs based on amazing standards using the most hardened security, the journey isn't over. New standards are always coming out. New security protocols are always coming out. So just like APIs have been on this continuum over the entire history of computing, going back to the 60s, they will continue to evolve and progress going well into the future. So the question is really, how hard or easy is it going to be to introduce open banking to Mexico, not necessarily APIs? If you take open banking to mean common, open, shared standards for the secure, consent-driven exchange of financial data, well, that's a different question. The good news is there's lots of established open banking regimes already all over the world. Your northern neighbors in the US and Canada are already going down that road. So there's a lot of places where you can learn, inherit, and build on top of in ways that are specific to Mexico's goals.
No, and I think that's something that's actually positive for us, because back in 2018, when the FinTech law came out, there wasn't much information on how open banking was doing in the world. A little bit from the UK, but it wasn't around as much. Now that, unfortunately 6 years have gone by, there is a positive upside to it, and that is that there's an experience, there's a learned experience internationally that we can use to really implement it in Mexico. What would be for you those key experiences that we should look out for?
So let me start by saying that open banking is unique from region to region. There's lots of elements that are common that make it the same, that let you call it open banking. But when you go from one place to another, it really is all wrapped up in the culture of the country, the relationship people have to their banks, the way that wealth is distributed in that country. So just like it has been different from one country to another around the world, it's going to be different for Mexico. Mexico is in an interesting spot and historically always has been. It's clearly a Latin American country, but it's in Central and has trade associations with North America. So it isn't necessarily going to be the same as what you see in Brazil or other Latin American countries. So it's going to be interesting to see. But here are some of the lessons that you can learn from others. First, think hard about the relationship between open banking and payments. What exactly are you trying to achieve on the payment side? Are there real-time rail initiatives happening in Mexico? Open banking leverage those. The best indicator of how that has done great success is probably Brazil. Their open banking regime very intentionally merged it with their PIX initiative. It's a great success. It both drove the adoption of open banking and drove enormous adoption of the PIX payment. So that's one good lesson. A second good lesson would be, what's the scope of the data that you want to share? Do you want to limit it to retail banking accounts, or do you want to step into the world of open finance, like things like insurance or investments, or even out of the box things like support for crypto accounts? That's something that has been front and center in Mexico's FinTech law since the beginning in 2018. So figuring out that scope of data that you want covered by your data standard, that's going to be another important lesson. And then finally, do you want to go even beyond that? Do you want to do something like what Australia did, where you're laying the foundation for a generalized data sharing mechanism through something like the consumer data right, and move into the world of things like open healthcare, open telecom, and beyond?
No, absolutely. And one of the things that we've actually been discussing, because we've been trying, and when I say we, I mean everyone who's involved in open banking and really wants it to work in Mexico, we've been trying to really make sure that it's from a regulated approach. And this discussion has occurred in your podcasts, so it'll be interesting to hear your point of view. But at the same time, we know situations, for example, our first neighbors in the north in the U.S., because also Canadians are our neighbors as well, even though we don't share a border precisely, we are neighbors. But in the U.S., one of the things that we saw that it began to be market driven, then it turned regulatory driven. What would be your point of view for us to do in Mexico after 6 years, where we've waited for it to be regulatory driven? It hasn't really happened. Should we start to band together and start to work on a market driven approach? What do you think should be the best possible outcome?
So it's a bit of a misunderstanding that it's a binary choice. You're right. This is a classic topic that has come up on my podcast, and it comes up all the time in open banking circles. Do you go market driven or regulatory led? And it's funny, it's often those words, led and driven, that go with their respective neighbors. It's always market driven, regulatory led, which gives you a sense of this push and pull. But in reality, it's not a binary choice. Every region that has succeeded at open banking has found a way for those two forces to get along. If you look at Brazil, who managed to go from virtually nothing to one of the most mature open banking systems in the world in the space of about a year, it's because the regulator and the market found a way to get along. Even though they yelled at each other sometimes and were furious at the last minute extension of deadlines and unreasonable requests, the fact is, if you sat in on those meetings, you would hear people who were ultimately friends, who understood that they were trying to achieve the same goal, which was to make Brazil's financial ecosystem better and stronger. That balance between regulatory forces and market forces is going to be unique for every region, and so will be the case for Mexico. Now, that doesn't mean that the market has to sit around and wait for regulation to show up. If you look at what you quite rightly used as an example, the US, FDX, the Financial Data Exchange, achieved enormous growth and enormous adoption without any regulatory push. But it's just as important to note that the minute the CFPB showed up and started introducing regulation, FDX flexed, cooperated, and found a way to accommodate those regulations in a complementary way. Even today, when Section 1033 is facing some uncertain times, given the change of administration and the fact that Rohit Chopra is no longer the director of the CFPB, nevertheless, FDX soldiers on. They work towards meeting the regulation and will continue to be flexible regardless of where it may land. So being able to handle not only a cooperation between the regulator and the market, but changes in that relationship over time is key to open banking success. The short answer, I don't see any reason why Mexican banks can't start today. Get together, take advantage of the associations you have, take advantage of fintech organizations like FinTech Mexico, and start building something. I promise you, the regulator will meet you in the middle.
Absolutely. And one of the things that many things that I love about your podcast is, I think it's your show where you start talking about what is open banking, because you ask, is it a regulation? Is it technology? Is it a public policy? Is it a set of different things? And the answer ends up being yes. No, yes to all of them. And basically to finish this teaser so that people can get hyped up for your visit to Mexico and your presentation at the FinTech Mexico Festival on the 27th. Obviously, this is for the users, no? And just tell us why you think it's important that users of financial services are able to basically, well, obviously they already own their financial data, but why is it important for them to be able to share them in a fast, safe manner?
Yeah, and thank you for paying such close attention to the show. That's quite right. I do talk about it in exactly that way. Open banking is a set of technologies, it's a set of regulations, and it is a kind of global movement. When I speak to people about open banking, there's sort of two ways you can approach it. One is to talk about that stuff, regulation, technology, and oftentimes their eyes sort of glaze over. You start talking about, it's about data sharing, and folks sort of tune out. It's about regulation. That sounds a little boring. But if you start talking to them about their money, suddenly it's a very different situation. Our money is fundamental to how we live our lives. It drives how we save, how we spend, how we invest in our future. So changing the way we relate to our money, the level of utility we have over our money, it changes everything. It changes our lives. It changes our relationships to each other. It changes our relationship to society. So the reason it's so important to create open banking is to give people the ability to share their money and share their financial data in a way that works best for them, that gives them the most utility, the most value, and the most promising future. you're 100% right. This isn't about doing something that helps the government or doing something that helps banks or doing something that helps fintechs, although it does do all those things. Fundamentally, this is about helping consumers or customers, or as I like to call them, people.
Exactly. And I think that's a wonderful way to end this first conversation. Thank you so much, Eyal, for accepting to come to Mexico to come to the FinTech Mexico Festival, which is going to be insane. I think south of Las Vegas is probably, it's going to be one of the most the largest and biggest FinTech events, and we're crazy. And we're so happy that you're going to be here with us. So thank you so much. We're looking forward to your visit, and I can't wait to discuss more with you.
Me too, Seb. I'm really excited to be there, and I hope to see all of you in Mexico.
Wonderful. Thank you.